And her question, coming in a whisper so fragile, was a dagger to my chest. I don't know what to do anymore, Eleanor. They're going to take everything from us. I held my breath, wishing the silence of the room would swallow me whole. But it was just a stage for the sight of her, kneeling on my floor, her eyes red and her face streaked with tears. She had no idea that the salvation she was looking for was in my hand, in documents I kept under my mattress, as if they were the dirtiest secret in the world. The sound of the rain against the window seemed to echo every tear that ran down my wrinkled face. Tears I wouldn't let her see for fear that the weight of the truth would turn them into guilt. The hand that once sewed silks and embroidered flowers now trembled on my lap, unable to reach for hers. I watched her cry, and in every sob I heard my son, Charlie. Her pain was proof of the love they had, but it was also the silent accusation of a promise he made to me, which I, for a reason I didn't fully understand myself, was keeping. That secret was a slow poison, corroding the relationship we'd built after his passing. I loved that girl, Camila, as if she were my own daughter. I saw her as the only piece of Charlie I had left, but every day I felt the distance between us grow, built by what I didn't say, by what I was hiding. That moment of despair wasn't about the house that was about to be lost, or the cars that she would never find. It was about my own heart, torn between loyalty to my dead son and love for my living daughter-in-law. This drama was just the tip of the iceberg, for I knew that the truth, if revealed, wouldn't just shake Camila's trust in MIT, could bring to light an even deeper secret. Left by Charlie, a secret I promised to take to my grave. And now, the weight of that omission was forcing me to make a choice that could send me to heaven or condemn me to hell. If my story has touched you, come with me to the end. Maybe you'll understand why a mother would stay silent in the face of her daughter-in-law's pain. And if you want to keep hearing real stories like this, please subscribe and share. Your story, perhaps, could be the next one to be told. My name is Eleanor Grant. I'm 78 years old, and I've lived my whole life in Madison, a small town in North Carolina with sleepy, tree-lined streets and the warm, slow rhythm of the American South. I worked for over 50 years as a seamstress in a small shop downtown. My hands still remember the rough feel of the threads, the smell of new fabric, and the repetitive sound of scissors cutting cloth. Now, retired, my refuge is the garden. Orchids that I cultivate with the same patience I once used to make wedding dresses. That morning, I had woken up early. The bright sunlight streamed through the slats of the blue wooden window, carving golden stripes onto the kitchen table. I prepared my drip coffee, felt the strong aroma fill the room, and went to water the plants. The wet earth gave off a fresh smell that reminded me of my childhood. It was an ordinary day, with the church bell chiming in the distance, until Camila's hurried footsteps echoed in the yard and interrupted my silence. She came in without knocking, just as she had since Charlie died. She wore her usual floral perfume, but her face was different, swollen, her eyes red. She put her purse on a chair and couldn't hide the trembling of her hands. "Mrs. Eleanor, I don't know what to do," she said, her voice choked. The sound of her voice went through me like a fine needle. I let the watering can drip onto the floor, waiting for her to continue. "They're going to auction off the house where Gabriel and I live," she blurted out as tears fell onto the table. "Charlie's debts, I didn't know. I can't pay them. They're going to take us out of there next week." I stood motionless. The smell of the coffee seemed to have soured in the air, and my heart beat so fast that my hands trembled. On the lace tablecloth, I knew everything. The deed was stored in my dresser, along with documents Charlie had made me swear never to show anyone. Inside were the papers for a house in the next neighborhood, 2 cars, and a sum of money he didn't want to reveal while he was alive. His request, on that night in the hospital, still echoed within me. "Mom, don't let Camila touch any of this, please," and I obeyed. Camila sat down, covering her face with her hands. Her crying was muffled, as if she were afraid of being a nuisance. The chirping of the birds outside seemed to mock the tragedy. I almost told her the truth, almost told her everything. But my mouth went dry, and the words got stuck. I just offered a glass of water, which she didn't want. I begged the bank. They don't care. My mother can't help, and I have nowhere else to go, she said, looking at me as if I were her last hope. Her gaze was a silent plea, but also a heavy burden. I felt the ground give way under my feet, as if every tile in the kitchen held a secret that could swallow me up. The phone rang. The metallic sound sliced through the room like a blade. I answered with a trembling hand, and the dry voice of the lawyer announced, "Mrs. Grant, we need your signature to complete the transfer of the deed." I closed my eyes. Camilla's silence behind me burned more than any words. The phone was still pressed against my ear when I heard the sound of Camilla's crying grow louder. The lawyer's voice repeated the same words, insistent, but I could barely think straight. Sweat ran down my temples, and the white kitchen wall seemed to close in on me. I asked for a minute and hung up without saying goodbye. The silence that remained was broken only by Camilla's sobs, who trembled in the chair as if she were a lost child. She lifted her red eyes and said, "Mrs. Eleanor, I don't know what to do anymore. I thought you might be able to help me, somehow. Gabriel asks every day if we're going to have to leave the house. What do I tell him?" The name of my grandson created an even bigger knot in my throat. I imagined that boy, only 9 years old, hugging his pillow, asking about his own home, as if it were a favor. The weight of the secret crushed me, and I almost felt my back arch even more. I stood up, pretending to straighten the tablecloth, just to avoid facing those eyes that begged me for an answer. The edges of the fabric smelled of coconut soap, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely smooth out the cloth. I wanted to tell her there was a way out, that life wouldn't crush them like this. But the memory of that last night with Charlie silenced me. He held my hand in the hospital, his breath short, and repeated, "Promise me, Mom. Promise you won't give her anything." Camilla walked around the kitchen, the heels of her sandals tapping on the old tile floor. She opened the refrigerator without looking inside, just to keep herself busy. She got a glass of water, but didn't drink. I know Charlie didn't leave anything behind. I accepted that, but I never thought he would have debts this big. I feel like he abandoned us twice. Her words fell on me like stones. The image of my son, smiling when he was young, came to mind, and I felt a mix of pain and anger that I couldn't name. I invited her to sit down again and tried to say something that sounded like comfort. But all that came out was, life sometimes puts us through tests we don't understand. It was a phrase which slipped through the air and fell without force. She lowered her eyes, disappointed. I tasted the bitter flavor of the cold coffee still in my mouth and realized that I had failed. Not as a mother, not as a mother-in-law, but as a human being. She insisted one more time. I just needed some time for someone to give me some guidance. I don't know who else to turn to. The sound of her voice seemed to beg for a miracle that I could offer in seconds. All I had to do was open the dresser drawer and show her the papers. The thing is, it wasn't just a drawer, it was a prison. Every time I remembered Charlie's request, my whole body stiffened. I found myself caught between two promises. The one I made to a dead man and the one that was implicit in the desperate gaze of a living woman. Time in the kitchen seemed to drag. The old pendulum clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Camilla wiped away her tears with her sleeve, and I didn't know if I had the strength to take any more. I looked at the door, open to the backyard. Outside, the wind made the orchid flowers sway, and I realized they had never seemed so fragile. In that instant, I thought, what if I break Charlie's promise? What would happen to me? What would be left of him in me? I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my hands on the table, feeling the cold wood under my skin. Camilla took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to get up. "I'm going. I just don't know where to," she murmured. Her sentence hung in the air as if it had been recorded on the walls. And even in silence, I knew if she left through that door without an answer, there might never be a way back. Camilla stopped on the doorstep, holding her purse tightly, as if all the stability she had left depended on it. I watched her in silence, the afternoon sun lighting up her disheveled hair, while the wind kicked up dust from the yard. "If Gabriel asks again, I'll tell him I don't know," she said, without looking at me. The sentence sounded like a warning, but also like a plea for help. She didn't have the courage to repeat. My heart ached, and I wondered if I wasn't letting my grandson believe that the world was only made of loss. I sat down again, the chair creaking, as if protesting my weight and the secret I carried with me. The smell of the orchids came in through the open window, mixing with the dust from the yard, and I felt dizzy, as if the air was too thick to breathe. I remembered when Camila first came into our family, shy, with her thick accent from the rural Midwest. Charlie had introduced her with pride, and I, though suspicious, welcomed her. Now, years later, she was here, begging for a gesture I was able to offer, but which my son had forbidden me from making. She took a deep breath, took another step inside, and said in an almost whisper, "If only there was a document, something that could give me a few months. Anything." It was like she had thrown a stone at my chest. The echo of the locked drawer in the dresser sounded in my head. I got up abruptly, dropping the dish towel on the floor. "Camila, sometimes we don't have that kind of way out," I said, and my own voice sounded like a stranger's, cold, harsh. Her eyes froze, and I realized I was about to break not just her hope, but also the fragile link we had left. She approached me, and for the first time in months, she touched my arm. Her hand was warm, desperate. "I know you don't owe me anything, but Gabriel, he's Charlie's grandson. He's your grandson." The mention of the boy made my body tremble. The smell of baby soap and the sound of his laughter playing in the yard cut through me like an invisible blade. I almost opened my mouth to confess, almost ran to the drawer, but something held me back. The memory of Charlie's gaze on his deathbed, as hard as Camila's was now. I swallowed hard and tried to gently pull my arm away. "Camila, you're young. You'll find a way. You always do." The lie came out so heavy, it seemed, to warp the room. She took a step back, with the expression of someone who has just been slapped. I saw her eyes fill with tears again, but this time there was no pleading, there was disappointment, and that disappointment hurt more than any accusation could have. We were interrupted by a knock at the gate. The metallic sound echoed through the yard, and Camila quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. I went to the window and saw the mailman with a manila envelope in his hands. My heart raced because I already knew what it was. The document from the lawyer, the summons for me to sign the deed transfer. My legs went weak, but I opened the gate and took the envelope, feeling the rough paper sting my fingertips. Camila noticed my trembling and asked, "What is that?" I hesitated for an eternal second, looking at the law firm's stamp printed in the corner. "Routine thing," I replied, trying to shove the envelope under a pile of old newspapers on the shelf. But I knew she had seen it. Her gaze followed me, curious and suspicious. And there, for the first time, I felt that my silence was starting to turn into a accusation. She didn't say anything. She just stood there watching me, motionless, as if trying to decipher a riddle. The kitchen seemed smaller, the air thin. The envelope weighed more than any dress I had ever sewn in my life. I knew that, from that moment on, there was no way to maintain that wall of silence for much longer. The clock struck 3 in the afternoon, and each chime seemed like a warning. The time for the lie was running out. Camila remained standing, her eyes fixed on the corner of the shelf where I had shoved the envelope. The room seemed suspended in time. Only the beating of a cardinal's wings outside reminded us that the world was still turning. I sat down again, trying to look calm, but I felt every muscle in my body stiffen. The afternoon heat clung to my skin, and sweat ran down the back of my simple cotton dress. Camila tucked her hair behind her ear and took a deep breath, like someone preparing a question that could change everything. "Why did you tremble when you received that paper?" she said, her voice firmer than before. I didn't expect that tone. Camila had always been sweet, reserved, used to speaking softly, almost asking permission to exist. But now her voice had weight, an unexpected courage. I tried to look away at the floor, where the shadows of the leaves were projected in crooked shapes, as if the light itself was exposing my lie. It's something from Social Security, a silly routine thing, I lied, feeling my tongue go dry, every word scratching me from the inside. She approached slowly, her sandal dragging on the tile. Mrs. Eleanor, don't hide anything from me. I've already lost my husband. I can't also lose the trust of the only person left from his family. The words hit me like short, precise punches. The silence in the kitchen became heavy, and I could almost hear the echo of my heart in my chest. In that instant, I realized it wasn't just about money, about documents or promises. It was about a thread of loyalty that still connected us, as fragile as an orchid stem. The memory came back in flashes. Charlie, sweating in the hospital bed, holding my hand tightly, the smell of alcohol invading my nostrils, the cold light reflecting off the white walls. Promise me, Mom, don't let her touch any of this. It's not hers. His voice was more of a grudge than of love, and it hurt me to this day. But I promised. I've always been one to keep my word. And now that promise was swallowing me alive. Camila's face in front of me looked like that of a woman betrayed twice, first by her husband, now by her mother-in-law. To escape from it, I got up quickly, pretending I needed to check the pot on the stove. The smell of the beans, which I had forgotten on a low flame, escaped through the lid, mixed with the sautéed garlic from lunch. Have something to eat, Camila, I murmured, trying to change the subject. But she didn't move. She just crossed her arms, insisting with her eyes that I tell the truth. The contrast between the familiar smell of food and the weight of that conversation made me feel like the whole house was a prison. Camila broke the silence. I feel like Charlie left something, but didn't want to say. I knew his secrets. I knew when he was lying, and he lied a lot, Mrs. Eleanor. Please tell me, is there something I should know? The question hung in the air like a shot fired in a closed room. There was no escaping it, no pretending. My hands held the edge of the sink tightly, my fingers sinking into the damp wood. The beans were bubbling, and that repetitive sound seemed to mock my silence. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, yes, Camila, he left everything in my name, and I hid it from you. But the voice wouldn't come out. What came out was a long sigh, almost a moan. We don't always have the right to know everything. It was the most cowardly phrase I had ever said, and it sounded like a confession to myself. Camila took a step back, her breathing quickening. I knew I had lost a piece of her forever, even without revealing anything. The sound of small footsteps echoed from the hallway, and before we knew it, Gabriel came running in, his shirt wrinkled and his hair a mess. Grandma, what happened? Mom was crying. The innocence of his voice cut through everything like a razor. Camila and I looked at each other in silence, both unable to answer. The boy came up to me, and when he held my wrinkled hand, I felt that this whole secret was no longer just mine. It was a shadow that was falling over him, too. Gabriel clung to my arm, and the warmth of his small hands made my body shiver. The smell of dust from the hallway mixed with the sweet sweat of a child, reminding me of when Charlie was the same age. I stroked the boy's hair, trying to hide the turmoil inside me. It's okay, sweetie, I murmured, but my voice came out shaky, almost a whisper. Camila looked at both of us, discreetly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, but her face showed the exhaustion of someone who no longer believes in comfort. He pulled on the hem of my dress, as curious as he had always been. Grandma, why was Mom crying? Is it because of our house? The question pierced me cruelly, as if his innocence was tearing down any barrier I was trying to maintain. Camila quickly came up and said, Gabriel, it's not the time to talk about that. But the boy insisted, his big eyes shining with anxiety. I really like it there. I don't want to leave. The silence that followed was more painful than any scream. I felt my legs give way. I gently moved Gabriel away and walked to the cabinet, pretending to look for a cup. The smell of reheated coffee filled the air, heavy and bitter, and I almost cried when I realized that not even small daily gestures could give me peace anymore. The envelope, hidden on the shelf, seemed to pulse, as if it had a life of its own. The weight of the secret was no longer just mine. It was stamped on the eyes of the boy who was looking at me, waiting for an answer I couldn't give. Camila, in a low but firm voice, said, "Gabriel needs stability. Mrs. Eleanor, I can't watch him grow up, not knowing where he's going to sleep tomorrow." Her words echoed through the kitchen, harsh and inevitable. It was impossible not to notice the implicit accusation. She stood up, ran her hand through her hair, and, as if she decided to expose everything at once, she added, "I know you keep things, you always have. But now, it's no longer about me, it's about him." I looked at Camila, and in that instant, I saw not the fragile widow I had always thought, but a woman who was willing to face anything to protect her son. Her expression reminded me of my own youth, when I faced the harsh stares of the town to keep my shop on its feet. It was as if time was coming full circle, bringing back a reflection I didn't want to face. The silence was so heavy that I could even hear the wood of the house creaking, as if it itself was complaining about what we were hiding inside. Gabriel, impatient, started to tap his feet against the tile floor, a rhythmic sound that amplified my agony. "Mom, are we going to have to live on the street?" His voice was clear, direct, unfiltered. Camila quickly bent down, hugged her son, and murmured, "Never, my love. Mom will figure something out." I saw, in the tremor of her chin, that she herself didn't believe what she was saying. The boy closed his eyes, trusting that promise as if it were the only truth he knew. My eyes stung, and I had to hold onto the table to keep from collapsing. I was being crushed between two promises, the one made to Charlie, who was no longer here to demand it, and the one implicit to Gabriel, who looked at me as if I had the power to save his world. My throat was dry, my heart hammering. I thought about speaking, but the words dissolved before they reached my lips. I just stood there, feeling the smell of the beans burning on the stove, a cruel metaphor for what I was letting burn inside me. Camila gave me one last look, long and silent, before getting up with her son in her arms. "Let's go, Gabriel. Grandma needs to rest." I wanted to stop them, to say anything, but my tongue felt like stone. They walked out the door slowly, and when the gate closed, the metallic click echoed in my chest as if it were the sound of a definitive loss. I was left alone in the kitchen, the smell of burnt beans filling the air, like a cruel reminder of my inability to act. I took the lid off the pot, and dark smoke rose, stinging my eyes. I threw everything down the sink, hearing the snap of the cold water against the hot metal. It seemed like a silent punishment. I had not only let the beans burn, but also the trust of the only family I had left. I leaned against the counter, feeling the cold stone against my back, trying to breathe deeply. I went up to my room slowly. The wooden floorboards creaked, revealing every step. When I entered, I faced the dresser, where the drawer hid the deed and documents. The smell of mothballs mixed with the old lavender perfume that clung to the stored clothes brought back so many memories. I remembered Charlie as a boy, running down the street with a wooden car. I remembered the day he opened the sewing shop with me. I remembered the day he went into the hospital and never came out. All of that was inside that drawer too, along with the promise that chained me. I sat on the edge of the bed and closed my eyes. The memory of his last night came back in detail, the humming of the machines, the cold of the air conditioning, the metallic smell of medicine. "Promise me, Mom, don't give her anything, don't let her take advantage." That phrase haunted me like a curse. At the time, I didn't question it, I just nodded. Today, I realized the inhuman weight Charlie had placed on me. I loved him, but I also knew his view of Camila was unfair. It was the blind jealousy that consumed him, even at the end. I opened the drawer with trembling hands. The paper had a dry, old smell of dust and aged ink. I picked up the deed and the car keys, feeling the physical weight of it all. It would only take one word from me, one gesture, to completely change Camila and Gabriel's lives. But with that, I would be betraying my son's last wish. My chest felt split in two, and no choice would leave me whole. As I stared at the papers, the phone rang again. The sound echoed through the house as if it came from inside me. I ran down, my heart racing, and answered breathlessly. It was the lawyer again. "Mrs. Grant, we need you to come and sign this week. The deadline is ending." My mouth went dry. I just said I would call back, and hung up before he could insist. I stood still, the phone still in my hand, feeling sweat run down my forehead. I sat down again in the kitchen, looking at the envelope on the shelf. The sound of the gate still seemed to echo, as if Camila were leaving again, and again, always carrying that boy in her arms. I closed my eyes and imagined Gabriel sleeping in some corner, homeless, without security. I felt a pang in my stomach, a nausea that almost made me vomit. The silence of the house was heavy as lead, and I realized I couldn't bear it for much longer. I got up and went to the backyard. The afternoon air was warm, but there was a light breeze that made the orchids sway. I touched one of them, the petals damp under my wrinkled fingers. I always thought flowers were like people, delicate but resilient if well cared for. Those orchids bloomed every year, even after heavy rains, even with extreme heat. And I, who had always taken care of everything, was letting my own family wilt before my eyes. I went back inside and sat down at the table, placing the deed in front of me. The paper seemed to stare at me, demanding a decision. The clock showed almost 5 in the afternoon, and the sunlight streamed through the window in golden tones, illuminating every dry coffee stain on the tablecloth. I took a deep breath, and for the first time that day, I was sure of one thing: I couldn't put it off any longer. Omission was turning into betrayal, and time wouldn't wait for me. I picked up the deed with both hands like someone holding a loaded gun. The paper crinkled between my fingers, and its dry smell brought an unexpected shiver. I walked around the living room, looking at every corner of the house, the old photos on the wall, the retired sewing machine, the furniture that had witnessed my whole life. Everything seemed to judge me, as if the objects knew I was about to break a promise. With every step, I felt the floorboards creak, as if asking me, "Now, Eleanor, which side will you be on?" I didn't have time to answer myself. The gate suddenly opened, and Camila came back in, leading Gabriel by the hand. Her face was even more haggard, her hair loose and her perfume almost gone, as if she had walked the streets for hours. "Sorry to come back like this, but I couldn't leave," she said, her voice hoarse. "I kept thinking about everything. I needed to try one more time." The boy looked curiously at the table, where the papers were laid out, and my whole body stiffened. "Grandma, what's that?" Gabriel asked, craning his neck to see better. Camila slowly approached, noticing the gravity of the scene. "They're documents, sweetie," I replied, trying to cover up, but my voice came out weak, betraying more than I wanted. The boy then clung to his mother's skirt, as if he sensed that something important was about to happen. Camila, in turn, stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the deed, as if she already knew the answer she had been looking for from the beginning. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm afternoon air enter my lungs and burn inside. "Camila, there are things Charlie asked me to keep a secret," I began, and the phrase weighed like lead in the air. She slowly raised her face, and I saw in her eyes a mixture of pain, anger, and hope. "He trusted me with this, and I promised, but today, seeing you two like this, I realize that maybe this promise is killing more than it's protecting." Camila approached, hesitant. "So it's true. He left something." My heart raced, and I felt my hands sweat. Gabriel looked at me like someone watching a judge about to give a verdict. I wanted to disappear, but the walls of the house seemed to push me forward, demanding a choice. The silence was so dense that I could hear the distant buzz of cicadas in the yard. When I opened my mouth, my voice came out trembling. "He did, and he left it in my name." Camila put her hand to her mouth, surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to admit it like that. Gabriel just smiled, innocent, not understanding the seriousness of what had just been revealed. "Then why didn't you say anything? Why did you let us believe we had nothing?" Her voice was now sharp, but there was still a thread of pleading hidden there. I lowered my eyes, looking at the paper on the table, and the memory of Charlie came back like a slap. It's not hers. I promised Camila, I said, almost in tears. I promised my son that I wouldn't let you touch anything. He believed you didn't deserve it, and I obeyed. But now I don't know if it was the right thing to do. The confession came out disjointed, my hands shaking so much that I almost let the document fall to the floor. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. Camila took a step back, as if she needed space to breathe, and Gabriel looked at both of us, not understanding but feeling the weight of it. The tension exploded when Camila raised her voice. And what did Charlie know about life anyway? He left us full of debts. He abandoned us without thinking about his son. And you preferred to honor the words of a man who is no longer here, instead of helping those who are still breathing by your side. Her fury cut like a knife, and I instinctively backed away. The kitchen walls seemed to narrow, and I felt sweat run down the back of my neck. The truth was there, naked, and there was no turning back. Camila's words echoed inside me like thunder on a cloudy day. I leaned on the table to keep from falling, the cold wood against my sweaty palm. I had never seen her like this, with so much anger. She had always been a contained, respectful woman, but now she spoke with an open chest, without holding back. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I like seeing my grandson grow up without security? I yelled back, my voice choked. The sound came out louder than I intended, and even Gabriel was startled, backing up a step. The silence that followed was so thick I could almost hear it. Camila was breathing fast, her chest rising and falling. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and her red eyes burned against mine. Then choose, Mrs. Eleanor. Charlie is no longer here. We are. Gabriel is. Who is more important now? The boy was pulling her arm, trying to understand why his mother was crying so much. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but her question pushed me to a precipice that I could no longer avoid. My knees went weak, and I sat down again. The room seemed to spin slowly, as if the air had lost its balance. The smell of the burnt beans still filled the house, mixed with the sweat and dust from the street. I remembered a cruel detail. On his last night in the hospital, Charlie held my hand so tightly that it left purple marks. Promise me, Mom. The memory made me shiver. To keep that promise was to continue punishing Camila and Gabriel. To break it was to betray my son, as if there were a fair way out. Camila approached and knelt down to my height. Her warm breath hit my face, and the salty smell of her tears reached me. I'm not asking for anything for myself. I just want Gabriel not to be afraid of losing the roof over his head. You're his grandmother. You know what that means. The boy, not understanding, just rested his face on his mother's lap, seeking shelter. That scene went through me with the force of lightning. I was shaking so much that I had to hold the papers against my lap so they wouldn't fall. The distant sound of a motorcycle passing on the street broke the tension for a moment, but soon everything returned to the unbearable weight. My mouth was dry, and the words dragged within me. If I do this, I'll be breaking my son's last wish, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Camila suddenly raised her face, her eyes flashing. And if you don't, you'll break the life of the grandson he left behind. That phrase hit me like a knife, because it was impossible to deny. I looked at Gabriel, who was staring at me with the innocence of someone who knew nothing about debts, promises, or deeds. For him, the house was just the place where he could play, sleep safely, and smell his mom's beans at lunch. I remembered when Charlie was the same age and asked me to rock him in the hammock on the porch. I hadn't protected my son from everything, and maybe I couldn't, but I could still protect my grandson. I held the documents firmly, feeling the paper crinkle between my fingers. My heart was pounding, and tears were running down my face without me being able to stop them. Camila, I don't know if I'll be able to live with this, but I can't leave you without an answer anymore. My voice came out choked, cut into pieces, but it was sincere. Camila held my hand tightly, as if she feared I would back out. The warmth of her skin contrasted with the cold of my trembling hands. It was then that I realized it wasn't just a practical decision, but a rupture. By revealing it, I would not only be handing over assets, I would be shattering Charlie's memory, exposing his distrust, showing that even at the end he didn't trust the woman with whom he had built a life, but at the same time, keeping the secret would be condemning Gabriel. Between the dead past and the living future, I knew I had to choose. I placed the papers on the table, the lace tablecloth becoming wrinkled under their weight. The sound of the clock on the wall marked each second like a verdict, the pendulum swinging without haste, reminding me that time wouldn't stop for me to decide. Camila kept her eyes fixed on the documents, but didn't say anything. It was as if she was afraid of pressuring me too much and seeing me back out. Gabriel, oblivious to the drama, played with the hem of my dress, innocent, not knowing that his life could change right there. In that instant, my breathing was short, and each word seemed to cost a lifetime. He left this house to cars and some money. It's all in my name. Charlie didn't want you to know. The confession came out heavy, like hot iron, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Camila put her hands to her face, as if she needed to protect herself from it. Gabriel looked at me, surprised to see me crying, and hugged my arm tightly, trying to comfort me without understanding. Camila took her hands away from her face and spoke, her voice broken. "So all this time, you knew." Her tone was no longer one of anger, but of disbelief. "Yes," I replied, in a thin voice. "I knew, and I was silent because he asked me to." The words sounded so small to me in the face of her pain. The air in the kitchen seemed still, warm, as if there wasn't enough oxygen for all of us. "He didn't trust me that much?" she asked, almost to herself, and I saw in her eyes the reflection of a wound deeper than the debts or the risk of losing the house. It was the pain of realizing that her husband, the man with whom she had shared years of her life, had doubted her until the end. I didn't know what to answer. I myself didn't fully understand Charlie's reasons. I had only fulfilled a promise made in desperation. "Camila began, swallowing hard. "I was wrong not to tell you. Maybe I confused loyalty with cowardice. But now I don't want to hide anymore. These assets are yours. And I want you to use this to secure a home for Gabriel." My voice came out trembling, but firm enough for her to understand it wasn't just an empty phrase. It was a decision, a rupture. I was betraying my son, yes, but I was also finally being fair to the living. She collapsed into the chair, without strength, crying in a different way. No longer from desperation, but from relief. "I just needed this. To know that he will be safe," she said between sobs, pressing her son's hand against her chest. Gabriel smiled, not fully understanding, but happy to see his mother less distressed. I looked at them and felt that a part of the weight had come off me. Another, however, still crushed me. That of having broken the word I gave to Charlie. I got up slowly, walked to the shelf, and took the envelope I had hidden earlier. I placed it in front of her, along with the other papers. "It's all here. We'll go to the lawyer tomorrow. I'll sign it myself." The phrase came out like a decree, and I felt a chill run down my back, as if I had just ended a decades-long cycle. Camila looked at me, surprised, maybe not believing that I was actually giving it to her. But what else could I do? I couldn't bear to live with the shadow of Gabriel growing up homeless because of my omission. The boy hugged me tightly, his small arms wrapping around my waist. His warmth disarmed me, and I felt my tears fall onto his disheveled hair. "Thank you, Grandma," he said innocently. Two simple words, but they shattered any resistance I still had. Camila's eyes met mine over her son's head, and in that instant, without saying anything, I understood that our relationship would never be the same again. There would be no forgetting, but maybe there would be rebuilding. Night fell quickly over Madison, bringing with it the distant sound of crickets and the smell of wood smoke from neighboring houses. The kitchen was in low light, illuminated only by the yellowish lamp that swayed slightly with the wind. I remained seated at the table, looking at the documents as if they were hot coals. Camila stayed silent, with Gabriel asleep on her lap, breathing deeply and peacefully, as if all the weight of the day had dissolved just because he could rest without fear. My eyes scanned every detail: the formal writing of the deed, the notary's stamps, the signatures that guaranteed that, in fact, that life Charlie wanted to hide existed. I thought about how everything would be different if he had trusted her, if he hadn't made me carry this secret. The sound of the wind hitting the wooden windows brought a shiver. It was as if my own son was watching me from outside, demanding the promise I was now breaking. I got up slowly, the floorboards creaking under my feet, and prepared coffee for the two of us. The warm aroma filled the room, mixing with the smell of the damp night. I handed a cup to Camilla, who accepted it in silence, her eyes fixed on the child who was sleeping. She looked exhausted, but at the same time lighter. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor," she murmured. Her voice came out weak, almost imperceptible, but full of truth. I just nodded, without the strength to answer. As we drank, I realized that inside me there was still a battle. A part screamed that I had betrayed my son. Another said that I had finally done what was right. The coffee burned my tongue, but it kept me awake, as if forcing me to face that moment without pretense. I was never one to delude myself. I sewed my life stitch by stitch, line by line, and I knew that every fabric has its resistance until it breaks. Mine was unraveling at that table. Camilla broke the silence after a few minutes. "He never trusted me, did he?" she asked without bitterness, but like someone who needs to mend an open wound. It took me a while to answer, but when I did, my voice came out low. "No, he was afraid. He thought you might lead him down paths he didn't want. And in the end, he didn't even trust himself." The phrase weighed between us, and I felt a pang of guilt for exposing the truth so crudely. But it was the least I could offer now, no more hiding anything. She wiped a solitary tear that ran down her face and stroked her son's hair. "I always tried to be enough. Maybe I never was for him, but at least I want to be for Gabriel." The way she said that went through me, because I realized that despite everything, she had a strength that Charlie never recognized. And, in a way, neither had I with every word. I realized that my relationship with Camilla was changing. There was no longer any room for secrets between us. Silence once again dominated the space. Outside, the crickets sang, and the wind rustled the leaves of the orchids in the backyard. I looked at them through the window and thought that maybe I was like those flowers, surviving the storms, but always needing care. For the first time in a long time, I accepted that I didn't have to face everything alone. I had a family there, even if it was imperfect and marked by distrust. But it was the family I had left, and that was enough. I then decided to put the documents in a folder and leave them on the table in plain sight. "Early tomorrow, we'll go to the lawyer. I'll hand over everything myself. There will be no more secrets, Camilla." My voice came out firm, like a period. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and surprise. And for the first time in months, I saw a shy smile appear on her face. It was as if the night had finally brought not just darkness, but also a breath of hope. I woke up before the sun came up, as I always had my whole life. The silence of the dawn in Madison was broken only by the solitary crow of a distant rooster and the cool wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. I got up slowly, feeling my bones pop, and went straight to the kitchen. The documents were still on the table, untouched, now illuminated by the bluish twilight that precedes the morning. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at them, as if it took courage just to touch the paper. I brewed fresh coffee, the strong smell filling every corner of the house. When the aroma spread, Camilla appeared in the hallway, still in her pajamas, her hair loose and messy. Gabriel was sleeping in the guest room, finally peaceful. She greeted me with a shy nod, her eyes marked by tiredness, but without that weight of desperation that had been with her the day before. I served her a cup, and for a few moments we were silent. Just listening to the drip of the coffee maker and the clinking of the spoons against the porcelain. "I didn't sleep well," she confessed, hugging the warm cup with both hands. But it was different. For the first time in months, I dreamed that Gabriel was running in the backyard without fear. That was enough for me. Her words made me swallow hard. I Watched her, thinking about how, despite all the disagreements, she was the one who was still there, firm, trying to raise her son alone. The sight brought me a kind of bitter peace, the certainty that I was giving something to someone who would truly take care of it. After coffee, I went up to my room and changed. I chose a simple, light blue dress, which I had kept from the time of the shop. I put on a little of my old lavender perfume and went down the stairs with the folder of documents in my hands. The weight seemed lighter now. Camila was already ready, her hair in a quick bun, and Gabriel was running around the living room, playing with a plastic car that I had saved from when Charlie was a child. The sound of the wheels on the floor echoed like a harbinger of continuity. We went out together onto the cobblestone street. The sun was already rising behind the mountains, tinging the sky with orange tones. The white houses reflected the morning light, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner accompanied us. People greeted us with the naturalness typical of a small town without imagining the drama we were carrying in that folder. Walking side by side with Camila made me feel as if we were, finally, sharing the same burden. We arrived at the lawyer's office. The environment smelled of new paper and reheated coffee, and the walls were lined with shelves, crammed with folders. The lawyer received us with a dry formality, adjusting his glasses on his face, and asking us to sit down. I handed over the documents, my hands steady despite my heart racing. He leafed through everything in silence, confirming what he already knew. "Just sign here, Mrs. Grant, and the transfer will be official." I took the pen, the cold metal against my fingers, brought back the memory of the sewing scissors, an instrument I had always used with precision. I took a deep breath and signed. The sound of the pen scratching the paper was definitive, as if each letter marked not only the document, but a life choice. As I handed the folder back, I felt an unexpected relief, as if a chain had been broken. Camila squeezed my hand discreetly, and she didn't need to say anything. The gesture spoke for itself, gratitude and acknowledgement. As we left, the sun was already high in the sky, warming the stones of the street and lighting up the old windows of the houses. Gabriel ran ahead, laughing, and his laughter echoed through the space, clear and free. I watched him with teary eyes, realizing that this was the greatest reward I could have. Charlie was no longer here to demand promises, but Gabriel was here to live the future. And it was in him that I needed to bet. We went back home in silence, but it wasn't the same suffocating silence as the day before. There was something different, as if the air was lighter. The sound of Gabriel's car wheels against the cobblestone floor sounded almost like music, and I caught myself smiling to myself, something I hadn't done in months. As I opened the gate, I smelled the orchids that were blooming in the backyard. They seemed to welcome me with even more vibrant colors, as if they also understood that something had changed inside those walls. Camila went straight to the kitchen to prepare lunch, and I followed her. For the first time in a long time, I noticed that she moved around the house as if it were really hers, without asking permission to open cabinets or touch the pots. There was no longer that invisible weight that made her seem like an unwanted visitor. "Can I cook today?" she asked, almost smiling. "Of course, sweetie," I replied without thinking, and the word sweetie came out so naturally that it moved me. She raised her eyes, surprised, but didn't comment. She just continued chopping the seasonings, letting the smell of garlic and onions spread through the kitchen. While she cooked, I sat in the living room with Gabriel. He was playing on the floor, laughing loudly, and with every laugh he seemed to push away all the ghosts that haunted me. I showed him some old buttons I had saved from my sewing days, and his eyes shone as if they were treasures. "Grandma, you made clothes with these?" he asked, curious. "I did, my love." Many dresses passed through my hands. As I said that, I realized that there was still a lot of me that could be passed on. Not just heavy secrets, but good memories too. Lunch was ready, and we sat down at the table together. The smell of steaming rice, fresh beans, and cooked meat filled the house, bringing back a feeling of home. As we ate, Camila commented, "Today Gabriel will sleep without fear. That's priceless." Her voice was serene but full of gratitude. I nodded in silence, trying not to let tears fall. Inside, I felt that I had finally done something that honored Charlie's memory, even if it was different from what he asked. After the meal, Camila washed the dishes while I dried. The simple routine, done in silence, had a different flavor. It was as if each clean plate was also a wound being healed. With every gesture, I realized that we were building a new way of living together, based not on broken promises, but on shared truths. I didn't know if she would ever completely forgive me, but I realized that she no longer looked at me with distrust, and that was enough. Later, we sat together in the backyard, while Gabriel ran among the flowers. The afternoon sun shone softly on the orchids, and the cool breeze brought the sweet smell of the plants mixed with that of wet earth. "He seems like a different boy," I commented. Camila smiled, watching her son. "He just needed to feel safe." Children notice everything, even what we try to hide. The sentence went through me as a silent reminder of how much my choices had weighed on that little heart. I looked at the orchids, remembering how they bloom unpredictably, but always return. I thought that maybe life was similar. Even after so many losses and silences, there was room to be reborn. "I hope you know that now all of this is yours." "I don't want there to be any doubts," I said, looking at Camila. She turned her face toward me, her eyes watering. "And I hope you know that I won't forget what you did. But I also won't forget what you decided today." Dusk arrived, and the golden light illuminated the porch. Gabriel fell asleep in my lap, the gentle warmth of his body warming my chest. Camila watched us, and for the first time in a long time, there was no uncomfortable silence between us, but a good stillness, full of meaning. I stroked the boy's hair and thought, maybe this was the true legacy that Charlie left without realizing the chance for me to choose love over fear. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of lightness I didn't remember feeling for a long time. The sun already came in strong through the blue window, illuminating every corner of the room as if it wanted to chase away the shadows that had been stored for so long. I got dressed slowly, listening to the sound of the living house, footsteps running down the hallway, voices mixed together, laughter coming from the kitchen. It was strange, but also comforting. I, who had always feared losing my space, now discovered that their presence was exactly what gave me back my meaning. When I got to the living room, I found Gabriel sitting on the floor, drawing with colored pencils. He showed me the paper with pride. He had made a simple little house with blue windows just like ours, and 3 figures holding hands in front. "This is us," he said, smiling. My heart almost exploded in my chest. There were no cars, no deeds, no money in that drawing. Just a home, which was what he needed most. I saved that paper as if it were the most valuable document of my life. Camila appeared right after, bringing a plate of simple cake, still warm. The sweet smell of the batter spread through the air, mixed with the freshly brewed coffee. We sat at the table, together, and she looked at me differently, no longer as a distant mother-in-law, but as someone with whom she could share her life. "Today, you can rest," she said, with a discreet smile. I drank the coffee and, at the same time, let my eyes wander through the room. It was as if, by finally sharing what was hidden, I had opened up space for them to truly occupy my life. "Thank you, sweetie," I replied. The word came out naturally again, without effort, and I realized that I was getting used to this new way of seeing her. We spent the day on simple tasks. We hung clothes on the line, took care of the garden, and Gabriel helped water the plants with the small green watering can I had bought for him. The sound of his laughter mixed with the sound of the water hitting the earth, and I felt my chest expand in a different way, almost as if I had gone back in time, when Charlie was still little. The orchids, swaying in the light breeze, seemed to bloom even more in the face of that joy. In the afternoon, while we rested on the porch, Camila looked at me and asked, "Do you regret keeping that secret for so long?" The question made me sigh deeply. "I regret confusing promise with prison," I replied, looking at the mountains in the distance. "But I also know that I did what I thought I should, even if it was wrong. Only now do I realize that silence can be crueler than the truth." She nodded, not insisting, and that silent gesture was worth more than any judgment. As dusk approached, we decided to go out to buy a few things at the grocery store. The streets of Madison were full of people chatting on the sidewalks, and the smell of sweet bread fresh from the oven spread through the air. Next to Camila and Gabriel, I felt the curious glances of the neighbors. I knew that soon everyone would be talking about the change, about how I had finally let go of what I was holding on to. But for the first time, I didn't care. Walking with them, with my head held high, was like sewing a new fabric in front of everyone. On the way back, Gabriel held my hand on one side and his mother's on the other. His small, firm touch gave me a sense of continuity, as if the thread of Charlie's life had been transformed right there without bitterness. I remembered how I had spent my life sewing for other families, wedding dresses, school uniforms, Sunday shirts. Now I realized that my greatest work wasn't in the fabric, but in this improbable connection that resisted time and wounds. Once we were home, we ate dinner together and then stayed in the backyard watching the sky darken. The smell of jasmine filled the air, and the sound of crickets lulled our quiet conversation. "You gave Gabriel a future today," Camila said. I looked at her and replied, "I didn't give him anything. I only gave him back what was already his. What I really gave was the chance for you to stay." The phrase came out laden with emotion, and I felt my eyes water again. She smiled, and that smile was enough to seal something between us. That night, before going to sleep, I walked to Gabriel's room. The boy was already sound asleep, his small body curled up under the blanket. His breathing was calm, and the gentle sound filled the room with a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I touched his forehead gently and whispered, "Your father made me promise a lot, but you made me truly choose." I went back to my room with a light heart, knowing that, finally, I had stitched a dignified end to that torn the fabric of our family. I woke up the next morning with a serenity I hadn't felt in decades. The sun came in through the blue window, reflecting on the white walls and illuminating every detail of the house as if it were a new beginning. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the distant sound of the church bell and Gabriel's laughter echoing from the backyard. That children's music mixed with the noises of the small town made me realize that, somehow, I had found a reason to live again. It was no longer just the silent routine of the orchids. Now, there were voices that filled the spaces. I went down the stairs slowly and found Camila preparing coffee. The smell of fresh bread spread through the kitchen, and she greeted me with a sincere smile, one that didn't need words. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. I replied that I did, and I realized it was true. The weight that had been with me for the past few months seemed to have finally dissipated. We sat at the table together, sharing coffee and the comfortable silence of those who no longer need to explain themselves. It was a new routine, but it already felt natural. Gabriel ran in with the drawing he had made the day before. "Look, Grandma, I added flowers to the garden." The colorful paper, full of joyful scribbles, made me shed a discreet tear. There was proof that fear had given way to hope. I held the drawing carefully, as if it were a relic. "It's beautiful, my love," I said, kissing his forehead. The boy smiled, satisfied, and I realized that his trust in me was the greatest inheritance I could receive. Throughout the day, we did small tasks together. Camila cleaned the cabinets, while I took care of the garden and Gabriel played among the plants. The smell of wet earth, the sound of the brooms sweeping, and his laughter created an unexpected soundtrack for that simple Saturday. It was in this daily life that I realized it wasn't the assets left by Charlie that would give meaning to our lives, but the way we chose to live from now on. In the afternoon, I sat alone on the porch, watching the mountains in the distance. I thought about Charlie, not with bitterness, nor with the suffocating pain from before, but with a serene longing. I understood that he was a man full of flaws, but also full of life, and that it wasn't up to me to judge his memory with eternal harshness. My role now was different, to ensure that Gabriel grew up without carrying the burdens that weren't his. This was my way of honoring both the son who was gone and the grandson who remained. When the sun began to set, I called Camila to sit with me. The orange sky reflected in her eyes, and there was a tranquility in her expression. "Camila," I said in a firm voice, "I want you to know that from today on, there will be no more secrets in this house. Everything that is mine is yours. This is my decision." She looked at me in silence for a few seconds and, with discreet tears, just replied, "Thank you." It was simple, but it was enough. That night, before going to sleep, I walked to Gabriel's room. He was already sound asleep, his hair messy on the pillow and his calm breathing filling the room with peace. I touched his small hand and felt a warmth that went through my entire body. "You are my second chance, my son," I whispered softly. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of a broken promise, but the lightness of a right choice. I lay down in my bed with a peaceful heart. I looked at the ceiling and let sleep envelop me without fear of tomorrow. I knew there would still be difficulties, but I also knew I would no longer face them alone. And when I closed my eyes, I thought my life was made of stitches, threads, and fabrics. Some tore, others were lost. But now, with Camila and Gabriel, I had finally finished the most important seam, that of my own home. Sometimes, life puts us in front of choices that have no easy answers. What to do when honoring the past means hurting the present, or when keeping a secret weighs more than bearing the truth. These questions stayed with me until the very end, and maybe they have also gone through your life at some point. If this story has touched something inside you, tell me about it in the comments.